Hello, and welcome to Utopian and Dystopian Fictions, a podcast hosted by me, Matt Leggett, a senior lecturer at the University of Winchester, where I teach utopian and dystopian fiction.
And me, Liam Knight, an independent scholar with a PhD in English literature from the University of Birmingham.
In this podcast, we interview scholars, thinkers, and writers from different disciplines, inviting them to discuss what interests them about utopias, dystopias, and speculative fiction.
Whether you're a student, scholar, or someone looking for reading recommendations, we hope you enjoy listening along. If you do, please let us know by rating and following the podcast wherever you are listening, leaving us a comment, or dropping us an email on utopiananddystopianfictions@gmail.com.
So, Liam, who are you chatting to this time round?
Hi, Matt. In this episode, I spoke with Paul E. Hardisty, a Canadian-born author and internationally experienced environmental scientist whose life reads much like one of his novels. Paul has spent more than 25 years working around the globe as an engineer, hydrologist, and environmental scientist, a career that has taken him from oil rigs in Texas to gold exploration in the Arctic, geological mapping in eastern Turkey, and even surviving a 1993 bomb blast in Yemen. He's held senior scientific leadership roles, including serving as the CEO of the Australian Institute of Marine Science, and he continues to work at the intersection of environmental protection, biodiversity science, and public communication. As a writer, Paul is the author of the critically acclaimed Claymore Straker series, which includes The Abrupt Physics of Dying, The Evolution of Fear, Reconciliation for the Dead, and Absolution. And most recently, he's published his climate dystopian trilogy, The Forcing, The Descent, and now his forthcoming novel, which should be out the day that we have published this episode, which is called The Hope. Alongside his fiction, Paul has published scientific textbooks and works as a journalist, including a lot of really extensive reporting from Ukraine on the front line in recent years. Now, much of our conversation centered on Paul's new novel, The Hope, which is the final installment of the Forcing trilogy. Set in a climate-ravaged future, the story follows a family across generations as they navigate an ecologically destabilized world shaped by political extremism, severe inequality, and a rapidly degrading environment. I think what makes Paul's dystopian vision so compelling is how grounded it is in real science and lived experience. His decades in environmental research and his exposure to geopolitical upheaval from Yemen to the Arctic to Ukraine deeply inform the novel's emotional and political core, as does, I suppose, his experience as a North American. For Paul, The Hope is not merely speculative fiction. It is a cautionary narrative with a deliberately optimistic heart. The title reflects the novel's deeper purpose, to show that even in the bleakest of imagined futures, the possibility of renewal is never lost. Now, we spoke about loads of different things in our interview, as our audience will soon discover. And one of the richest threads of our conversation was Paul's argument that ecological decline and democratic decline are deeply intertwined. Drawing on his global scientific career, he described how the erosion of democratic institutions, the rise of oligarchic power, and the concentration of wealth all act as accelerants for environmental collapse. He pointed to his recent reporting from Ukraine as a vivid example of how autocracy and resource exploitation often go hand in hand. In democratic societies, he argues, everyday people care about their local environments, the park across the street, the forests that they walk through, the beaches they swim in, and so on. Democracy gives them a voice in decisions affecting these places. But when governance becomes captured by elites, the natural world becomes merely a resource to be carved up. Now, this confluence of political and ecological crisis sits at the centre of The Hope, illustrating a world where environmental collapse and authoritarian power reinforce one another, driving society towards what Paul calls a new kind of global feudalism. Something else that really struck me was this theme that was woven beautifully throughout his novel, which is the role of literacy as resistance. The role of reading and books is really, really central to the novel. Paul spoke powerfully about how historically literacy has enabled societies to break away from feudalism. Once people could read, question, and think critically, they became much harder to control. In a novel, this is embodied in the character of Boo. She's the protagonist of the novel. And she's a young woman who lives in the climate-ravaged 2080s Australia. And she has a remarkable memory. She can read entire books and then remember them page for page exactly. Paul actually calls Boo the goddess of literacy in our interview. Her ability to remember and understand becomes a source of strength in a world where formal education has been hollowed out. The final theme in our conversation, one that really underpins the trilogy, is the idea that a better, fairer, and more sustainable future is absolutely achievable, but not without sacrifice. Paul described a major scientific study conducted during his time in Australia's National Science Agency, which modelled pathways to a more prosperous and ecologically stable future. Astonishingly, it found that such a future was not dependent on futuristic tech, but that the tools and policies already existed. He argues that what stands in the way is not scientific limitation, but political inertia and vested interests. The choices that are needed to achieve that more positive future, whether that's tax reform, regulation, environmental protection, and so on, would require individuals and industries to give up short-term conveniences. This belief forms the emotional core of the hope. Progress is possible if we remain engaged, informed, courageous, and unwilling to surrender to apathy. As Paul emphasised, the minute we give in to despair, the forces driving us towards collapse have already won. I hope it comes across in the interview, Matt, but talking of Paul was genuinely really energising. His intellectual clarity, deep love of the natural world. Our audience are going to be really unfortunate that they can't see the beautiful backdrop of the Australian bush that he was essentially walking me through as we were talking. They're really unfortunate to miss out on that. And his lifelong commitment to both science and storytelling shine through in the answers that he gives. What struck me most is his conviction that hope is not naive, it's a deliberate stance, an act of resistance, and something that becomes stronger the more we share it. I left our conversation feeling thoughtful, inspired, and ironically, or perhaps not, it's in the spirit of his novel at least, hopeful. I'm sure listeners will feel the same as well. Matt, that's a bit of a sneak peek for our audience about what myself and Paul chatted with, but what stood out for you from the interview?
Yeah, thanks, Liam, for that really thoughtful summary. I think you did a great job of really capturing what the vibe, I think, at least as well as the content of the discussion was, it was really, he was a warm guy that was very personable. And I know you really had a great time chatting to him. One of the things aside from the things you mentioned, that I thought was interesting and kind of connected with me personally was right near the beginning of the interview, and he talked about why is he writing, and he was talking about he's writing for his two boys. And someone who's obviously got a young child myself, that's something I can really sort of appreciate and understand. Fundamentally dystopias are cautionary tales, but in some ways sort of writing in a hopeful way, as a way to challenge people, make them think, and get them on side with kind of addressing issues like climate change. And I just felt like, well, my outlook has changed quite a bit since my son came along, and this last week we were celebrating my son's first birthday. Well, he didn't do much of the celebrating. It was mostly us. He's not going to really remember it. But we had cake, and we had a little gathering, and it was lovely. But yeah, it was just sort of, since becoming a parent, one of the things I've struggled with, I think, is how there are just so many people out there who themselves must be parents, grandparents, etc., who just aren't like willing to listen to things like warnings from climate scientists about the future. I just can't get my head around the sort of blasé attitude that people who themselves have children have towards these problems, because for me it seems like really obvious that as a parent, you're looking even further ahead. Okay, I might not be around. I think climate change is more pressing than this now, and my life may well be affected, but certainly my son's life is going to be shaped by the kind of policy decisions that are taken over the coming years. And I think, so Paul's interview was really timely, I think, to make us think about that. And that's obviously something that was driving his his writing in general, and his general thought process.
Yeah, I think something that really came across for me is, you're saying there, like, so many people ignore climate scientists. They ignore the alarming but really urgent things that they tell us. And I think that's something that Paul and I maybe touch upon ever so slightly, and maybe we talked about it before or after the interview, and I'm sort of conflating the two in my memory. But part of his novel also deals with misinformation, disinformation, post-truth, and so on. And I think one of the real benefits of The Hope, his novel, is that novels and narratives are inherently emotive, right? They're inherently affective. And they do actually make use of a lot of the tools and mechanisms of post-truth, disinformation, misinformation. They tug at people's heartstrings to get them to care about something. They tug at people's heartstrings to incite rage about things in maybe some of the more negative usages of post-truth, misinformation, disinformation. And so I wonder if this is where Paul has got this really exciting double perspective of the climate scientist who knows his stuff, but he's now the writer, the creator of narrative, who can weave those warnings in a maybe more digestible form, or in a form that people are more willing to accept or to engage with, at least. Again, I think Paul and I do touch upon there being a crisis of literacy, and reading comprehension and critical thinking in our chat too. But I suppose it's one thing to expect people to listen to science talk, basically, and maybe a different thing to expect them to listen to stories. And maybe this is like the stepping stone to help people bridge that gap.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that made me think about this was near the beginning of the interview, he reads from the book, and it's evident from that he's reading the opening of the book. It's evident from that opening that he's talking about intersecting crises, right? This isn't one thing. And it made me think about our discussion of things like polycrisis and stuff that goes all the way back to episode 8, when we were talking to Diletta Di Cristoforo. We did our episode on post-apocalyptic fiction. But of course, this makes it really difficult to deal with. So one of the reasons perhaps that people don't confront these problems is because they don't feel like they have the power to do so. They feel like it's too complex, and so maybe it's easier to bury your head in the sand. But at the same time, I think that complexity also makes the solutions actually really rather simple. And I think that's one of the things that came across, for me at least, in the interview, is that what he's suggesting is actually really quite fundamentally utopian. It's about having a core set of principles that if enough people stick to, then we can really make change in the world, right? So if we leave it all to one another, then it won't get done. And, the funny thing is, and this is highlighted in the extract he read, that these principles, these core principles, seem absolutely self-evident, right? So who would actually disagree with these ideas? This is, I think, his point. No one's actually going to say, well, I don't want a nice, clean, healthy environment around me. I want the world to be polluted. No one actually thinks like that, right?
No one's advocating for climate crisis, are they?
No one actually I mean, you get some people that joke about global. It would be nice if it was a couple of degrees warmer, but they don't actually want the climate to break down, right? So there'll be people, of course, who call these kind of principles naive, but I don't think they will fundamentally disagree with them. And actually, yesterday I was teaching my intro class to utopian and dystopian fiction, and was asking the students, as I do, to design their own utopias. And I did it a little bit differently this year to how I've done it in the past, because I often just sort of let them have sort of free reign, and you get all sorts of different responses. But I actually asked them, instead of diving straight into writing laws and these kinds of things, to think about a core set of guiding principles or philosophies that underpin their utopia, and therefore the laws that they create will be about enacting those kind of principles of philosophies. And I think that kind of umbrella thinking might be the kind of thing we need today, because we have sort of for example, a founding principle that we're not going to do any harm to the environment, that is what ends up reshaping almost every other policy decision. So if we can have these kind of broader, overarching principles, they can lead on the kind of policy front. And I don't know that Paul necessarily directly says it in that way, but I kind of got that sense from the interview that this would be sort of the way he kind of is thinking in some capacity.
Yeah, for sure. I think, as I said, there was a real utopian element to both the novel and to sort of mine and Paul's discussion of it. That although the novel depicts a pretty bleak future, there's sort of multiple instances of hope in it. Not just the title, but in terms of that, there's hope for the future for the 2080s. By the end of the narrative, there is hope for the present moment for us, because there's a character who basically talks about how we reach the climate ravaged future 2080. So we've got that critical dystopia element in there too, that helps us to see where we could be ending up, and so therefore we've got the warning sign now for us as readers to maybe do something about it. So yeah, there's so much hope in this novel that's underpinned by these core principles of, in essence, protect the environment, be good to one another, believe in the power of reading, or remain literate, remain critical. So many of those principles, they are basic, they are self-evident. They may seem obvious, but maybe it's there's no shame in being committed to the obvious. There's no shame in sticking to those and really believing in them. And maybe it's that belief that's it's that we need to stick to. Maybe it's that's being lost a little bit.
Yeah, maybe there's a sense that writers of dystopian fiction would be necessarily kind of cynical, or that they're people that perhaps are inclined towards pessimism and pessimistic thinking. But actually, most of the time, I think authors of dystopian fiction are generally hopeful. I think that's certainly come across in this case. But I think there was a part of your discussion I thought was interesting. You were talking about kind of the prophetic nature of his books, and also akin with that, the prophetic nature of dystopian fiction in general. And of course, we often tend to give credit to authors whose works seem to have anticipated the future, right? I mean, Orwell's the kind of prime example of that, where people always talk about how he was prophetic. And, he didn't think of himself as someone who was trying to predict the future. He would be horrified, right? If he knew that this was how things were panning out. So if these texts are warnings, when we call the authors prophetic, we essentially like signal that they failed in some degree, because we didn't listen to their warnings. Their warnings weren't heard, right? But yeah, fundamentally, I think, Paul obviously is a kind of utopian, I think, a hopeful person. I mean, you mentioned this in the summary, but I think one of the things that really came across powerfully for me was his argument that people do care about their environment. We tend to, and again, this is something I was talking to students about yesterday. We have a tendency to be very cynical about human nature, and that holds us back. I was actually talking, about the traitors to the students. So, the traitors is really interesting. Loads of people, of course, at the moment are highly invested in the show. And, if you ask people what it's about, they'll tell you it's about like how people are deceitful and how easy it is to lie to your friends and this kind of thing. And it's actually not about that at all, is it? Because, I think it's funny that it's just a game, right? They don't actually murder anyone. But these people really have emotional difficulties, chucking their friend out of a game, that they, these are people they've only just met like a week ago. So they actually connect really well with one another. I mean, you've got people from all walks of life, from all sorts of different jobs, backgrounds, races, ethnicities, sexualities, ages. And they, the main message I would take away is that fundamentally these people get on. Actually people like each other, and they come to, when you get to know people, you come to care about them. So but we have this sort of real instinct towards cynicism about human nature. But Paul was pointing out people do care about their environment, at least their immediate environment. And so he was sort of saying, well, a functioning democracy is central to climate action, which is something you mentioned. But it also sent me back to our interview last time out with Amy, that she was very much talking about, commons, what we hold in common. And there was some really nice, I think, sense of cohesion between those two episodes, actually.
Yeah, no, I think, sorry, I'm sort of thinking about the utopian potential of the traitors. Maybe we've got an episode on that to come. No, I think spot on. I think, we spoke a lot about environment and the environment being related to democratic proceedings, and yeah, fundamentally, I think Paul sees there being good in people, and even actually in the novel itself, we have a lot of people who either in their past or even in the present do or are coerced to do or are forced to do pretty horrible things, and yet that, like, I struggle to find, maybe bar one character in particular, but I struggle to find generally anyone who's actually a bad person in a novel. Like there's a lot, like, people are generally either striving towards doing something good, striving towards what they see and believe to be good, and not even in like a warped or twisted way, or people who are quite like naive and uneducated and don't understand why what they're doing isn't good, and are shocked to see that. I'm aware that's something that sounds very decontextualized, because I've read the novel and our readers, our audiences, haven't yet read the novel. But there is, I think, a fundamental belief in the goodness of people scattered throughout the text. That again is another cause of hope. Before we roll the interview, Matt, I just thought it'd be appropriate to say another thank you to Paul for his time. It's always nice to have an author on the podcast talking about their creative works. But also thanks to the people at Orenda Books, as well as Danielle in particular, for getting in touch and for sending us across some advanced copies of the novel. I've got mine right next to me on my table. Here it is. There we go. Not that anyone can see that apart from you, Matt. But yeah, I just want to say a big thanks to the folks at Orenda Books, Danielle in particular, and to Paul for their time.
Yeah, it's always good, especially when you've got these time differences, and we really appreciate when we've got an international guest on, if they make time for us. Well, with that in mind, Liam, I think it's time to get stuck into the interview.
I think so too. So I'll tell myself then in the future, editing Liam, roll that jingle.
I am delighted to be joined today by Paul E. Hardisty, who is an author of several works of dystopian fiction, among many other things. Paul, could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, hello, audience, and hello, Liam. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast today. And I'm talking to you from beautiful southwest of Western Australia, where it's about 35 degrees, clear skies, bit of a breeze, and the ocean is beautiful for swimming in.
Oh, lovely. Well, I mean, as we were saying just earlier, Paul, it's much colder here in Birmingham in the West Midlands. So I'm not envious whatsoever about your delightful setting there. Paul, your professional background is hugely varied. I mean, looking at your bio on the Orenda Books website, it says here you've spent 25 years working all over the world as an engineer, hydrologist, environmental scientist. You've roughnecked on oil rigs in Texas, explored for gold in the Arctic, mapped geology in eastern Turkey, where you were befriended by PKK rebels. You were in Ethiopia in 1991 as the Mengistu regime fell. You were in 93, you survived a bomb blast in a cafe in Sana'a. You're a university professor, a CEO of the Australian Institute of Marine Science, and of course, an author of several works of fiction. So how did all of those experiences, and this is quite a big question, but how did all of those experiences bring you to writing a trilogy of dystopian fiction?
Yeah, well, I'll just point out, thank you for summarizing that. It makes me blush a little bit. You can't see that on audio, obviously, but note that happened over many years, many decades, right? So yeah, it's been a journey, and I've always been a risk taker, and I've always wanted to see life as it really is. And I think that's part of what a writer needs to do. And look, the motivation for this particular book, The Hope, and the two previous books in the trilogy, the first one, The Forcing, and the second one, The Descent, talk about a world in the pretty near future that I do not want to have happen. So they're cautionary tales, as I think most dystopian fiction is. And look, I'm a father of two boys, and they're as they've grown up here in a beautiful part of the world, right? This is arguably the ultimate argument against dystopia right here in Western Australia. You know, it's still beautiful. It's sparsely populated. Nature is abundant and resplendent. The oceans are well looked after, etc. But you know, we know that the overall global situation is just not good, right? And it's been going in the wrong direction my whole life. And, you know, as an environmental scientist and engineer, I've watched this. I've worked on projects my whole life trying to get better outcomes. And I must admit that, you know, I look back and at my professional efforts over my career, and it's hard not to be despondent because all of the global metrics are going in, as I said, in the wrong direction. And so the motivation for writing these books was a bit of a wake-up call. It was a bit of a cri de coeur for me. It was a bit of a, I don't know, almost a bearing witness and a testimonial for my sons, so that they knew that I cared about this stuff, that they knew that I was trying my best, and that one of the ways I think as a writer that I can help try to change the future, and I think we can have the future we want. So I'm actually an optimist, even though I'm writing dystopian fiction. And it also partly explains the reason for the title of the book, right? The Hope. The third one is about hope, that there is a pathway to a better future. But it was really for my boys, hey? It was sort of saying, yeah, look, I know it's not going well, but there's hope for the future, and we got to get people to wake up.
Yeah,
So I hope
that.
to do both.
Yeah,
Wake
no,
people up and have hope.
I love that, and I think yeah, Matt and I, my co-host, we were just on a call the other day, and we were talking about how lots of dystopian fiction is inherently utopian insofar as it hopes, not sort of a unfortunate or a happy pun there. There is hope that by presenting these negative futures, that can instill change, that can empower change, that can educate, and not just scare people, but really motivate them to work towards something better, something different. And I think that really comes across. I mean, as you've said, and I hope the audience really pick up on it. I'm really so I really feel from speaking with you already is you really truly love the natural world, right? It's not just from a professional viewpoint, but you know, when we were talking just before we were recording, you showed me sort of just what's in front of you, and you know, it seems that you absolutely love and cherish the natural world. Is that a fair summation, Paul?
Yeah, well, I'll show you right now.
Yeah.
I mean, your audience won't be able to see it, but the natural world down here is just amazing. It's just stunningly beautiful, and we're right on the Southern Ocean, and it's very lonely and very wild, and you know, kangaroos and beautiful birds, and yeah, so it's at the heart and soul of what I believe I was put on the planet to care about and to try to do. And all of the books I've written, both the textbooks and the nonfiction works and the novels, they're all one way or another about this issue, about the world we live in, and on our connection to it, and the fact that if we don't look after it, it won't look after us.
Yeah.
So yeah, you know, that's the translation also, and that's what I've done in my professional career as an environmental scientist and engineer. I've always worked in environmental protection, from waste cleanup to working on cleaning up nuclear waste facilities, to toxic dumps, trying to clean those up, to, later on in life, working on biodiversity protection, and then as CEO of Australia's National Marine Science Agency, doing all the monitoring work and the work on the Great Barrier Reef and other coral reefs around the world, trying to help them to survive and adapt to climate change. So
Wow.
it's at the core of everything I do, Liam. Yeah.
No, and trust me, that really, really comes across, and really comes across as well, or especially in The Hope, your novel that is coming out by the time that our audience are listening to this, pretty much today. It's coming out, as we're publishing this episode. So, audience, I'll make sure to include, Paul, links to the book in the episode description and so on, so people can go and find it. But I was wondering, Paul, we've spoken a little bit around The Hope, your most recent novel, but I wondered, could you please tell us a little bit more about it? Is there maybe an extract you want to share with us, just to give our audience a flavour for the novel that we're talking about today? Yeah.
Well, look, I think what I might do then, Liam, thank you for the invitation. I might just read the opening little prologue.
Yeah, please do.
Because it kind of sets the book up, bearing in mind that this is the third in a trilogy following sort of one family across from 2024 all the way to 2082, where the Hope is set. So it covers 3 generations of the same family living in a world that is really not going the way we want it to go. So, prologue. Author. Mr. President, you've spoken repeatedly about the pathway that we might have taken to avoid the calamity that befell the world. Frankly, given your record, do you think anyone will listen? Ashworth, I offer no defense for my actions. It was a long time ago. We did what we had to do, what we thought was right. Our intentions were good. Our execution was disastrous. I accept your condemnation, but the pathway, it was real. It still is. Author. It may have existed as an idea, but was it ever attainable? Ashworth. The pathway isn't a goal, it's a way of getting there. The goal was always clear, it still is. Live in peace in the paradise we've been given, and don't fuck it all up. Author. Fair enough. So how? Ashworth. Focus not on the few things that divide us, but on the many that unite us. The desire for peace, the hope for prosperity, the love of our children, and our wish for a decent future for them. Compromise on the rest. Find courage, the courage to stand up to bullies, to do the difficult things when required, to sacrifice for the greater good. Work together, collectively, recognizing that our differences aren't failures. Cultivate an educated, literate, and engaged populace, able to discriminate truth from lies, and participate in democracy. Dare to imagine the future we want, and the futures we don't. Look after the world and share its bounty fairly. Do these things and watch everything change. Author. Simple to say. Ashworth. And hard to do. But there's one element that binds them all together, makes them all possible. Something that takes all the ifs and transforms them into a single, inevitable must. Author. Go on. Think of it as a question. Something we each need to ask ourselves. Something someone very close to you believed in. How big is your heart? It's a very old message. Author, is there anything more specific? Ashworth, you don't sound convinced. Author, it's not about convincing me, Mr. President. This is about the people who might one day read this. Everything you've described seems self-evident. If everyone undertook to live their lives in the way you describe, of course things would have been different. Ashworth, not everyone, Kweku. Not even most people, but enough of us. Enough.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks.
Lovely reading. Lovely reading. I think something that really stands out for me for this is, so we've got this is the prologue to the novel, and it's that discussion between the author Kweku and President Ashworth, who we learn a lot more about both of them as the novel sort of progresses. And what I think is really interesting is that the sort of climate and ecological crisis is implicit in this. It's not explicit saying, oh, we've really ruined the environment, although there is the line, look after the world and share its bounty fairly. So there's that environmental angle in there. But I think what's really interesting is that there are several other themes or like crises that are maybe implied as well in this opening prologue. Something that really spoke to me in the middle of it was cultivate an educated, literate, and an engaged populace able to discriminate truth from lies and participate in democracy. And as we were saying before we started recording, I was telling you that my PhD thesis looked at post-truth and dystopia, and I think there's definitely something in that. Now you've kind of already answered this a little bit in your earlier sort of discussion. But it's often said that authors of dystopian fiction are responding to the issues of their time. And I suppose in addition to the climate crisis and sort of all the awful things that we as a species are doing to the environment, which issue or other issues did you find yourself responding to or focusing on throughout the Hope and the rest of the Forcing trilogy?
Yeah, well, you've picked it up, Liam.
Yeah.
So you're a good reader.
Yes.
But look, one of the things maybe I'd share with your audience is that I have been to Ukraine several times writing about the war since the war started. I was there in 22. I was there in 2024. I was there in 2025. I'm going again in a few weeks. Spending a month or 2 months at a time, crisscrossing the country, right to the front line with soldiers, refugees, aid workers, displaced people, you name it. And part of the motivation for that is that this is one of the issues of our time, right? The erosion of democracy, the rise of the autocrats, of the billionaires, of the oligarchs, right? Which is all to do with this increasing acceleration of concentration of wealth and income and power in fewer and fewer hands, right? It's almost becoming pharaonic in its in its disparity between the poor and the uber ultra rich. And yeah, so I'm watching what's happening with Trump in the United States, and the Descent, the one before the Hope, has a Trump-like character. I wrote it before Trump got in his second term, but has a Trump-like character and a bunch of oligarchs and a bunch of billionaires, and they're busy, driving the outcomes that you see in the Hope. I won't spoil it any more than that, but that book starts in 2024, and it says, how did we get to that world, right? How did it happen? And so the whole trilogy is very much about this confluence, this meeting of key issues. So yeah, autocratic nations don't look after their people. They don't look after the environment. They only look after the rich few, the cabal at the center, at the core, the heart of power, right? That's all that matters. Everything else is there to serve it and to be sacrificed to it. And you can see that writ large in Ukraine. So yeah, I mean, if people are interested in that, they can follow my Substack. I'm writing regularly about Ukraine, about writing, about conflict, about love. So those things, I hope, all come together in the Hope. Particularly at the end, you'll see, I think, the threads start to be drawn together.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll be sure to link your Substack in the episode description as well, Paul.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, thank you.
Please, be safe, travel safe. I hope. Yeah, I wish you the best for your travels. And
as the soldiers will tell you, right? It's not up to you. It's just all luck. Whether an artillery round lands on top of you or a drone gets you, you're in the right place. You're doing all the right things, but it's the wrong time, or vice versa. So yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. But
I wish you the luck then.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Something as well that really stood out for me, as you were sort of talking there about, sort of the political environment to which you're responding to, not just sort of the natural environment. And this really spooked me almost when I was reading it, was the Trump-like figure who you reference discusses turning Canada to a 51st state, which obviously
my home country, by the way. Canadians are really pissed off about that.
And then also, I'm sure I'm not inventing a memory here. It talks about Greenland as well. It talks about sort of invading or taking over. I'm sure that's in there. And just
totally.
it was spookily prescient. And I just think I don't know if I'm saying this to give you kudos for just sort of hitting the nail on the head, or if it's if I'm seeing you as some sort of prophetic messiah, or if I'm just
No, don't. I don't want to be, because, yeah, particularly if you read the first two as well, and if you read the whole series, I don't want to be prophetic, because this is something I do not want to have happen. Yeah, some of the things in the short term that that are in the books have happened, but everything else, no, right?
yeah.
It's
No, yeah.
like,
We want to avoid it.
yeah, please, no.
Yeah, no, fair. Paul, we're talking about politics, and sort of some of the political tensions or issues prevalent in the Hope and the rest of the Forcing trilogy. But what I found is that we've spoken about issues of environment, we've spoken about issues of democracy, but you don't deal with them separately in the text. For example, you write fairly early in the novel, what he came increasingly to see as the real world, what remained of nature, the oceans, the air he breathed, the democratic society his parents still treasured, had been deeply compromised. So my question here really is, in your view, what is the relationship between democracy or democratic proceedings and the environment?
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, Liam, no political system is perfect, right? I mean, I think, paraphrasing Churchill on democracy, it's by no means perfect, but it's better than any other system that we have tried from time to time. And the great advantage that democracy has with respect to the environment, I believe, is that a functioning democracy is all about that each person has a voice. And I firmly believe that people care about the world. They certainly care about their immediate environment. They care about, the trees in the park across the street. They care about the natural areas that they like to mountain bike through or walk through, or the park, wherever you're from, right, in your city. People care about those things. They care a lot. Maybe they don't even know exactly why. Maybe they haven't actually sat down and thought hard philosophically about, why do I care about this? But they do. And to the degree that they then have a voice in the proceedings, whether that thing is standing or turned into a mine, or 15 million board feet of lumber, or cleared for the next military base, then I think that there's hope for nature. You can see all of the NGOs around the world that are out there fighting like hell to protect the oceans, to protect certain species, to protect different ecosystems. That's civil society in operation. That's all that is, right? That's not government. That's people. And to the degree that governments are increasingly captured by vested interests, captured by the big industrial powers and the uber rich, well, then we're in trouble. And that's what's happening, right? That is what's happening right now. And thank God for individuals like my wife Heidi, who is a full-time conservation volunteer and is out there every single day fighting like hell to protect this beautiful countryside that you can see here behind me, and the beautiful birds and animals that live here. Democracy is the hope for protecting the world, I believe. Now, we've got to make sure that democracy functions properly, and that's why the hollowing out of democratic institutions that I mentioned in the book, and that this person is reflecting on, is really, really dangerous for all of us for so many reasons.
Yeah, wow. I mean,
Bit of a long-winded answer, but there you go.
No, but not at all, and by all means, really powerful. I think you're spot on. I suppose if democracy is the fabric of people working together, and if people care about the environment, care about the things around them, then a properly functioning democracy that works in the interests of its people should be looking to safeguard and protect the things around them. And as sort of you said there, and also in response to an earlier question, the powers that be seem more interested in gutting the natural world for its resource, for the sake of profit or whatever.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
and
the reason for that, sorry to interrupt, but before I lose this thought, the reason for that is that nature, the environment more generally, the oceans, the atmosphere, they're common goods. They're common assets. They're the commons, right? Economists talk about the commons. That means every person on Earth, we own those together. Each one of us has 1/8 billionth share in all of that. Now, the privatization of those same assets in the name of profit takes that share away from you. You don't own it anymore. They privatize it and they turn it into whatever it is that they're trying to make. And you lose. They win, you lose. And with 8 billion of us on the planet, before 100 years ago, there was space, there was room. Nature seemed infinite, and there was always buffer. There isn't buffer anymore. There's too many of us, and we're too technologically adept now to at taking what we want out of the natural world. And we're starting to rub up against these two conflicting ideas of the commons versus the privatization of the natural world for profit.
Yeah. Wowzers. I mean, so yeah, I can totally see then where, you know, the hope, you know, and again, I don't want to give spoilers away for our audience, because I do really, you know, want them to go away and read the novel. But there's hope at the very, very end of the novel, in terms of maybe political change, and people with, I suppose, the right interests in mind, you know, the sort of right attitudes at heart, that maybe they will be able to steer the 2080s future away from the sort of awful path that it's descended upon, towards a more fair, equitable, environmentally conscious, and so on future. And I hope that's a message that I was really left with by the end of the novel. Let's hope it's one that our audience too are left with. The narrative of the hope oscillates between two sort of halves, if you like. One is the life of Boo. So she's like our main protagonist, Boo, or Becky, and her life in the 2080s climate ravaged Australia. And then the other half is the biography of Lockie Ashworth.
Lockie Ashworth, yeah.
Yeah, who is a former US president. He's the president who is being spoken to, being interviewed in the prologue that you read out for us. And he features prominently elsewhere in the trilogy. So you're oscillating between these two narratives. One that is, I suppose, a more traditional literary mode. You know, just this is a story, and then there's the document of the biography of Ashworth. Could you tell us a bit more about why you chose to make this structural choice?
Oh, yeah. Two reasons, or actually a number of reasons. One is that I wanted there to be a central narrative drive that talked about the present in 2082, showed where we had ended up, and then illustrates that whole hopeful drive forward that needs to happen and does happen. And some of the themes around the fact that if you really want something good to happen, you have to be prepared to sacrifice. And I think in our infantilized world, the powers that be infantilize us and just pat us on the head and say, don't worry, we'll look after everything. Everything will be okay. Just keep buying stuff, keep consuming, right? It takes away agency from us. That notion that, yes, we can do things, but we have to act. And sometimes that means that some of us will have to sacrifice. So I wanted that drive to be real and immediate. I like writing in a very immediate sense. I like action, and I like moving a narrative forward. So with that spine or backbone in the book, I also wanted to have another thing happening, and they're related, right? Because they're not completely separate, right? They weave in and out of each other. They braid, don't they? As the novel moves on, and you can see at the end how they unite. But nevertheless, the second one is that I wanted to have this view that was a legitimate message of hope that wasn't just for the 2080s. I wanted the person there to have lived now. So he's old, but he's still alive. And I wanted him to have lived now so that he could legitimately say, the character, that this pathway for a hopeful future always existed. It existed back then. So you see, he's writing almost, he calls it, I think, a letter to the past.
Yeah.
So if I could write a letter back to the past, to myself and to the world, to try to urge them to do certain things, what would it contain? And so that was the idea, because I wanted people to be able to read it now and think, oh, well, yeah, okay, in 40 years or sorry, in 60 years time, maybe we'll do that. But that it all began there, and that the pathway existed, and it does.
Yeah, so I suppose we have hope both in the 2080s, as in there is a hope for we're trying to get because time is weird here. So there's hope in that contemporary moment for that future, for the future beyond 20.
Yeah, for those characters that hopefully, you're starting to get invested in, and you're going, gee, I hope for them that there's hope for them.
Yeah. But then also by having the Ashworth biography, by having a character who has by having Boo, who's at the end or an end point of the trajectory, and by having the Ashworth biography, who's lived much further throughout the trajectory. Yeah, he's been alive, and sort of alive and kicking.
Born in 2012. He was born in 2012, to memory. Yeah.
So he's able to then look back at his past, which is basically our present, and that hopefulness there is then to give him, but also maybe us as readers, that hope again still, right? So we can see that it's not to change the way, it's not too late to unpick some of the issues and evils that are present in the world. It's not something that we can save just for the 2080s. It's something we can address and respond to and think about and learn from now.
And we must.
Yes.
And I believe we will, and we shall. I believe it.
Yeah, I mean, this may be this is one of my later questions, but actually we'll come to it now, because towards the end of the novel, Ashworth discusses, and maybe this is a real study, and please tell me if it is. He discusses an economic and ecological study conducted in the early 2000s, which concluded, I'm sort of paraphrasing here, that it concluded that a better, fairer, and more environmentally healthy world could have been reached by the 2080s without the need for futuristic tech. It was all of the mechanisms and technology was already in place. And he says, and I really like this as a quote, because I think it's kind of right at the heart of the novel. He says, "Sounds like utopia, right? Some kind of fool's dream." And these are two separate questions. And so I suppose my question for you, and I think I know what the answer is already, but I've thought I'd ask anyway: is such a future possible? And what might it take for us to get there? Or is it indeed a fool's dream? Is this a utopia where utopia is not meant in a sort of negative, derisive term, but an attainable or a workable thing to move towards? Or is it indeed a foolish impossibility, that good no place that we'll never reach?
Well, absolutely not. So it's absolutely a possibility in real life. So when I was one of the directors of the National Science Agency here, called the CSIRO, the Commonwealth Science and Industry Research Organization, it's the big national research agency, and I was one of the executive directors. And my unit, my business unit, they were called that, completed a major study that was published in 2013, and it was called the Australia National Outlook. And it modeled for the first time, it made the cover of Science magazine, which for a scientist is like being on the cover of Time, right? So it was a huge study. You can Google it. You can just Australia National Outlook. And basically what it did is it took conventional models of the Australian economy that Treasury uses to, model tax return or tax information and model the economy. And then it plugged in other models that represented all of the natural world. Water flows, waste, climate, biodiversity, you name it. And then it calibrated it against the last 30 or 40 years of data in all of those areas, and then ran it forward. And it ran it forward with a range of different policy settings. And lo and behold, what it found was startling. What this and it's part of the reason it was so well received in the scientific world. It showed that indeed there was a pathway that was available to Australia now. And all it took was pulling certain policy levers. None of it required new technology or anything else, just the right policy levers around taxation, around regulation, etc., where Australians were all wealthier. The wealth was more evenly distributed across all of society, including Aboriginal society. Particularly rural Australians were better off. We had not only reversed our quite precipitous biodiversity decline that's been going on for the last 20, 30 years. We had not only plateaued it, but had reversed it. So biodiversity was increasing in health across the country, including on our coral reefs. We have materially helped to change the trajectory on global climate change, and a whole bunch of other really, really good outcomes. So you could say, okay, they're all good outcomes. It's utopia.
Mm-hmm.
It was modeled. You could do it. Now, there were a hell of a lot more policy setting combinations that led to where we are, like continued decline across all of these metrics, continued concentration of wealth, right? Just things getting worse and worse and worse and worse, which is where they are now. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so, like, we were really hopeful at the time as a bunch of naive scientists that the government, because we went to Canberra and briefed cabinet on this and stuff, that they would say, oh, wow, eureka, we can do this. Of course we didn't. And the reason is that the vested interests don't want to make the sacrifices, and many people don't want to make the sacrifices necessary that come with those policy settings. But the point is, yes, absolutely 100% achievable. Mm-hmm. Now, democracy has to work. People have to say, actually, that's the future we want, right? Screw the big oil companies. Screw the big mining companies, screw the big landowners. Unfortunately, guys, like, we're not saying this is a communist revolution or anything, but we're saying is that we're going to put in some policy settings that are going to change things and change them really quickly. Like major tax changes, could really quickly change things without, as I said, reverting to major revolution and burning down Parliament House. So it's possible. Absolutely.
Amazing. I'm going to go and find the report that you're talking about. First to give it a read myself, but again, I want to put it in the episode description just because I was sort of wondering, actually, like, knowing your sort of professional background, if it was not just I assumed it was a real paper that you were alluding to, and
it is.
I wondered if you have involvement in it as well. No, that's really cool, and actually, I think something that I found really cool throughout the novel is, in addition to that paper, I think you have a sort of a joke or a nudge, wink, wink, where Boo, our sort of main protagonist, she has this amazing capacity for remembering everything she's read, and literature is a really important thread in the novel too. And you sort of allude to she finds or she reads some of your work too, which I liked. I thought it was a bit cheeky. But what I wanted to ask was, the novel does feel like a love letter to literature. Boo and her family build a secret library. The acts of reading and writing are really central to the narrative. I actually thought, and this is something I didn't know if it was intentional on your part, but where, how can I say it without giving it away for the audience, where Boo's circumstances get worse and worse and worse, she seems to throw herself more into the acts of reading or remembering reading, or like with her memory, with that photogenic memory that she has. So I wondered, this thread of literature and reading and the importance of books, it really comes across in the novel. What do you think the value of literature is in dystopian scenarios, or I suppose more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, that was actually very intentional. I mean, obviously, I'm a writer. I love literature. I always have. But there's something really interesting when you look back in history, because I love history as well. When you look back in history, what got human beings to rise out of feudalism, to shake off the yoke of feudalism? And if you look at it and you look at the history, it's basically literacy, right? Before, when in pre-literate times, before the printing press and so on, before most people could read, etc., at least in the West, we were serfs, we were slaves, we were owned by the lords and masters, and they could use superstition, the divine right of kings, and our own ignorance to keep us in our place. But with the dawn of literacy and the ability that reading creates the ability in people's minds to now process complex ideas, nuanced discussion about our place in the world and about the rights of human beings and so on and so forth, then all of a sudden feudalism it took a couple hundred years, but its death knell was sounded, right? As soon as people became literate, because no longer could they just be told to shut up and their ignorance be preyed upon. And the problem now is that with AI and with our quote smartphones, beautiful irony there, literacy is plummeting around the world, and there's all kinds of data to support that, right? Literacy is plummeting. I've got a friend who's a professor of English literature at one of the universities here in Australia, and she was telling me that when and she's been teaching for 35 years. She said 30 years ago, when she assigned the Pit and the Pendulum, she said everybody could understand it, right? Because there's a lot in that, and there's a lot of imagery, and there's some very deep messaging in that particular story. And she said, and then as the decades got by, the number of people who could actually see what Poe was trying to get at declined precipitously. And now she said 95% of them, they just think it's like a horror story. And so, I mean, that's just a personal anecdote from somebody that I know and trust, but all the data shows. And so we're entering a period where we have a real risk of entering a new feudalism, because now you're in your ignorance, you're prey to disinformation, to misinformation, right? You go on the internet and you read some stupid thing, or you read, TikTok, 7 seconds of blah, and your mind switches because you can't read and you don't want to read a 500-page treatise on economics and the social rights of man. So it's a worry, and so I wanted to have that in the book, right? Because that's part of the hope.
Yeah.
Part of the hope, as we mentioned in the very opening salvo, the opening prologue, that we've got to be able to read. And we've got to keep reading. And I reckon people need to start reading again. And that's part of how we're going to make sure we have a good future.
Yeah, nice. I think you're spot on. Like, there's something about literature and literacy at large that is, as you say, really empowering, right? Like, literature is freedom. Literacy is freedom. It's freeing at the very least. And so, yeah, and also I was thinking, actually, there's a character called Boy in the novel, isn't there? And he's illiterate. And Boo is sort of making attempts to help him to learn to read. But again, he although he is physically strong, he is very sort of powerless, actually, in much of the novel.
Boy is big and strong. Boo is a little wisp of a thing. And yet in moments of crisis, he crumbles. Because he can't process, he doesn't understand, he doesn't know what's going on. She can think her way out of it, so she doesn't crumble.
Yeah, no, and that's something that actually really stood out to me in the text as well, is that I did pull the quote, but I don't have it to hand. Is Boo acknowledges in essence that she is perhaps the complete opposite of an archetypical sort of dystopian heroine, right? She expresses that she is small, she is weak, she can't run the quickest, or she has low stamina and so on. But actually, I think she says, like, but I'm clever, I'm smart, I've got a good memory. And I think that is, as you're sort of saying here, that is why she's so powerful, why she's so important in the novel, is that she is literate, she is smart, she is able to think her way out of these crises, and she's able to, I suppose, retain within her all this vast knowledge that will hopefully unpick some of the evils of the past.
Yeah, to me, she is literacy.
Yeah.
To me, she's the goddess of literacy, or whatever, however you want to call
it. Two really quick questions from me. I hope quick questions. One, again, I think has become apparent as we've been chatting, but I'd still like to give you a chance to have a sort of real definitive say here. The dystopian genre is typically seen as quite didactic. It's teaching a lesson, and I think it's clear from discussing already that you agree that dystopian fiction can teach readers about something. If you were to say that The Hope had one really clear, definitive, strong lesson to teach readers, what is that lesson?
Don't despair. Keep hoping. The minute you give up, that's what the powers that are taking us in the wrong direction, that's what they want. They just want your silence and your acquiescence. So keep fighting.
I suppose the novel is called The Hope for a reason, right? That message is imparted even at its title. Well, Paul, we'll sort of be wrapping up shortly. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, and hopefully it's not taking you out from the sunshine for too long. But last, when Matt and I have guests on the podcast, we invite them to recommend a text, and that can be literature, film, criticism, something else entirely, to our audience in case they wanted to think a bit more deeply about some of the ideas that we've discussed in our conversation. So, of course, in addition to the rest of the Forcing trilogy, which I'm going to go and read, as I was saying to you before you're recording, it was great to read like the Hope, having not read the previous two books, but now I want to go and read those as well and sort of see the journey or the puzzle sort of in full. So, in addition to your novels, of course, Paul, what would you recommend to our audience? What should they be reading, watching, engaging with to think a bit more deeply about some of the issues, environmental, political, literacy-based issues that we've been discussing?
Oh wow, that's such a difficult one. Could I send you a link? But look, I don't know if you've read the novel Overstory by
Richard Power.
Richard Power. Have you read that?
I haven't, no.
It's really good. And I think it's a great book to read if you're interested in this kind of thing. In terms of nonfiction, can I send you some thoughts?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, please do. And you'll be the very first to send us like a bibliography afterwards, which it's you're a trendsetter, Paul. No, please.
Right, good on you.
Anything that you want or you recommend that our readers listen to, watch, engage with, whatever, please do send my way, and I'll include that in the episode description so they can go and click links and sort of follow things around. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. Honestly, it's been awesome chatting with you. It's been a real delight. I hope our audience are super sort of empowered by what you've been talking about today. I think your love for the environment and your not just love, but like your sort of fierce protection of it, your belief that this is something really valuable and treasured that we must strive to protect has really come across. And I feel really G'd up by that. So I hope that they do as well. So yeah, thank you very much. The book will be coming out by the time that our audience are listening to this. It should be out pretty much today, the day this episode comes out. So yeah, thank you so much, Paul.
Take care.
Thank you so much to Paul for joining us for a really engaging and empowering conversation. The Hope is out now, and you can find it at all good bookstores. Thank you to our friends at Orenda Books for getting in touch, sending us an advance copy, and connecting us up with Paul. If you enjoyed this episode, you can let us know by rating and following the podcast, leaving us a comment, or sending us an email on utopian and dystopianfictions@gmail.com. And, naturally, please tune in next time where we will explore some more utopian and dystopian fictions.